On today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we recap Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni's press conference. Howie hinted into a lot of his thoughts about potentially his ideas for day one of the 2024 NFL Draft. All that and more coming your way.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in, Eagles fans. I'm Louis DiBiase, co-host of the Locked On Eagles podcast. You can find my work also over at Bleacher Report. Same with my co-host, Gino Camilleri, who's our scouting director. On today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, Howie Roseman had a lot to say today about the 2024 NFL Draft, his thoughts potentially on trading up on day one, cornerback talk, tackle talk, all that and more. We got a recap, plus A.J. Brown's future now that DeVonta Smith was extended. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. And today's show is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL in all capital letters for $20 off your first purchase. So, Gino, again, it was a Howie Roseman, Nick Sirianni press conference, but around this time of year and when you go to free agency a month back as well, normally when Howie's at the podium, he's the one with a lot to say. More questions go towards the general manager because you just don't have as much access to him, right? Sirianni you talk to almost every day during the regular season, and Howie's running the show right now. And I thought he had some really interesting things to say about corner and offensive tackle for day one options because those are the two main ideas for the Eagles and what they need short-term and long-term. And I think based on his responses, I wasn't really surprised by his responses, and it would lead me to believe he's going to do one thing that's something he's always done.
I think Howie, before we get into the X's and O's of what he wants to do, he's become very introspective over the years.
He needs his own podcast. Honestly.
I truly appreciate how he talks about team building. And if I were to say I'm under like a team building tree, it's like I would say I'm under the Howie Roseman tree on like how I approach the draft season.
There's not many GMs that have as much to say, like in depth about roster building. It's always fascinating to hear him. And I think he likes to hear himself talk a little bit, but I do too. So
it's better than hearing Nick just ramble on about nothing. I feel like I hear him. I'm sure people are like, that's what you sound like, Gino. You just ramble on about nothing. But no, when it comes to team building, I think Nick did say a couple good things when it came to how the coaches view it. And we could talk about that in a couple of minutes. But when it comes back to it, Lou, Howie has had so many years of data to go and study to where, to your point, those times that he has taken the trenches and has hit on offensive line, it has been more often than not. So I completely understand where he is coming from in that regard. But at the end of the day, he took a step back today and like went through some of the classes and some of the hits and misses and how he has gotten to this point of becoming the GM that he is. And a lot of it was through the mistakes. I mean, do you get the good picks of guys like Cam Jurgens and guys like Landon Dickerson if you don't go through the Danny Watkins?
You don't get DeVonta Smith without Jalen Reagor, without whiffing on Justin Jefferson. And
what Nick said today about it being great that he can be there to see these guys get their deals and get signed. Well, hats off to Howie Roseman to making that part of the culture. I loved what Howie Roseman said, that if guys see these guys getting contracts, why would you want to leave? And guys come here with the understanding that they're probably going to be extended for multiple contracts at this point. And in this world where it is 2 to 3 year deals, but at the end of the day, Lou, I think he really understands that he has to have as many swings of the bat as everybody else. And
for sure,
he's not smarter than anybody else in the National Football League. He's just had more chances and more opportunities than a lot of other guys have had.
And one reporter did say that and asked him a question like, do you think you can take more chances because you have security? You can think more long-term because you're not trying to save your job. And he kind of shook his head like he's not always safe, but for the most part, he's been safe his entire career. There's been a few times on the hot seat, but for the most part, that was a good question. And you know, like you said, he needs as many swings of the bat as anybody. And normally when he's at bat, he takes a swing on an offensive lineman. And just based on what he said about tackle and about corner, gun to my head, I think he's drafting a tackle, even if it's not in the first round. After hearing him today, I would guarantee you he's taking a tackle in the first 2 rounds. Like he mentioned that they only signed one lineman in free agency with Matt Hennessy. They mentioned how important it was to have Cam Jurgens watch Jason Kelsey's process over 2 years. They talked about long-term taking Jurgens versus like the more immediate need of that 2022 second round. Kind of talked about how short-term needs versus long-term needs, like there's priorities there. Just based on his tone, talking about tackle versus corner, and he had some interesting things to say about both. I think the dude is absolutely taking an offensive lineman early on next Thursday or Friday.
But I want to say something to add to that, Lou. It's not just taking the offensive tackle to take the offensive tackle. He said a very niche point that I don't think you would have picked up on, and unless you were an Eagles fan, going back to Andy Reid and Andy Reid's quote of drafting those positions that affect the quarterback. That's why he wants to take care of his biggest asset.
But you know what, he said that too when he was talking about cornerback.
You affect the passer one way or another, Lou. We've had this exact conversation on our show. Andy Reid, what does he want? 2 guys on the tackle, 1 guy on the outside that can catch the ball, and 1 guy that can defend that guy. And that's the cornerback position as well. But that's good to see, Lou, that he is willing to understand that in today's day and age, that position is a premier position. And
I don't think he's ever been somebody that didn't prioritize corner, Gino, and he was even asked today. It's been a different route. And I think it was Jeff McClain that asked him today. It's like he gave him the stat of how you've only drafted 1 corner in the first 2 rounds ever, and it was Sidney Jones. Like, why is that? And Howie didn't like back down from that. He said the numbers are the numbers, but he pointed to a plethora of big free agent contracts they've given out to the Nnamdi Asamoahs in the world, trading for Darius Slay, trading for, Ronald Darby. And that's true. And I've always said that on the show as well as you, that I've never thought that he thinks of corner the same way as linebacker or even safety. He knows it's a very important position, but he's just taken other routes. And I think not taking a corner in the first 2 rounds, it's just been collateral damage from, I think, his overkill of drafting in the trenches. But I think he didn't try to say today that, he's not, that's something that he's done calculatedly. He did back up that that's been the case, but also did say he's definitely tried to build corner in other ways and mentioned Slay and Bradbury being studs in 2022. So I thought it was interesting to hear him talk about corner as well. And he was a little more tight-lipped, which maybe is a good thing. Maybe, corner is big in the plans next week. It did feel like he was more reserved talking about corner than offensive line.
I also thought, not that he does throw shade, but the comment that he made about having guys like Jeff Stoutland that are able to coach up this level of talent, and how many times you and I have had the 2017 team building discussion about the cornerback room and how that led into 2018. And I will always say, talking to the 4th and John guys before that Buffalo Bills game, I said, right to E-Rock and Gale, I said, Howie Roseman has done enough on paper at that cornerback position.
Yeah.
They have to get those guys ready and roaring and on the field and able to play. And what does he say today, Lou? He mentions Rasul Douglas having success when he goes outside of Philadelphia. So
he subtweeted Rasul Douglas. Yeah, I'm so glad you caught that too, because when he said, we've had some day 2 guys as well go on to have success elsewhere, I'm like, that is at Rasul Douglas 100%.
But in Rasul's favor, where
I was gonna say, was he saying it to hype? I believe it was.
I think he was trying to say that guys like Jeff Stoutland, who are able to coach up their talent, are able to stay in Philadelphia and get the best out of their players. Where other positions, they have had the guys.
So was he trashing Jim Schwartz?
I think he was trashing the guys that were the defensive back coach at the time.
Which is fair, because Howie did draft Rasul Douglas, and Schwartz was the one that didn't want to play him.
It was good enough, man. And this cornerback room right now, I mean, you're 1 move away from getting this thing right back into
for sure
pristine position, hopefully for the next couple of years. And Howie Roseman saying that today, Lou, to identify his misses and understanding that there's multiple ways to build a team. That's what we get so honed in on at this time of year. And he said right after the draft, this thing doesn't end. We're on to the next portion of #Howie season is what we call it. But he's always looking to build teams. And of course he is. That's such a dumb statement, Gino. He's the general manager of a National Football League team, but he's always looking for that next venture, that next step. And heck, man, what if he does go out there and he acquires Patrick Surtain or one of these long-term cornerbacks, and then what's going to be the narrative? Oh, he doesn't draft cornerbacks. Well, you have to put all of the context together. Like, yeah, you didn't have to get a cornerback when you go out there and get Darius Slay and James Bradbury, and these guys are there for multiple seasons. And you don't have to go and acquire offensive linemen because you're really good at drafting them. Well, hey, if that's the way that he's found talent, then keep doing that. But at the same time, don't stop yourself from going out there and taking swings on these guys, because you have to. I mean, you took a swing on Keely Ringo. Could it pay off? It started to pay off towards the end of last year. What about Eli Ricks? What about these guys that you put minimal assets into? What if you're putting premier level assets into these guys? You've only missed on one. It was Sidney Jones. Got to take more swings.
I know, it's not like he missed 5 different times, and that's never stopped him before, Gino. He missed so many times at receiver, and then he finally got it right with DeVonta Smith and A.J. Brown.
Offensive line too, man.
Right, that should not deter you because you missed out on Sidney Jones and because your defensive coordinator wouldn't play Rasul Douglas, that you should not take a corner. I'm very proud that he said that. Big victory lap today for the Zool Hive, absolutely, who's thriving over in Buffalo. But yeah, he had some really interesting things to say, and I do think corner and offensive line, regardless of the order of where they go, they're coming to Philadelphia early in the 2024 NFL draft. Could it be in the form of a trade up from 22? Howie had some comments to say about that as well, and kind of brought it into the depth of class conversation. So we're going to get into that coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you, especially during draft season for sure. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking about the same thing this week. I know Gino is. I absolutely cannot stand player comps in the draft, right, Gino? Like, do not give me the side-by-side graphics of Nelson Aguilar and Jerry Maclin. I can't take it.
Don't give me the Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson.
Exactly. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than player comps in the NFL draft, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule, no matter what your work shift is, your lifestyle. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's Locked On NBA. BetterHelp.com/Locked On NBA. That's BetterHelp.com/Locked On NBA to get 10% off your first month of online therapy. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, Locked On's NFL Mock Draft Live releases officially tomorrow, April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So stoked for this thing to be coming out. Streaming on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel, which is on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Find the ultimate 6-episode series tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to hear who the local experts of Locked On, including Gino and I, are picking for every NFL franchise, with live reactions from local college football experts and even the fantasy football angle, which is big. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft on April 17th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, streaming live on our Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel, YouTube, or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Cannot wait for that. The draft is only 10 days away, or 9 at this point. Unbelievable. Next Thursday, the Eagles pick at 22nd overall, at least as of right now, Gino. And I think Howie Roseman, it was so funny. Like, it was just like an impulsive thought that came out of his mouth, and he was just like, I like to trade. Like, he just kept saying, like, he kept mumbling, I love the trades.
I love the trades.
I want a t-shirt of that. That was, or a sound effect. That was so funny, because they were asking him about what his favorite part of this process is, and instantly he started talking about trades, and he talked about that, and then he was talking about depth of class and how maybe that's a reason he can stay at 22 because of all the quarterbacks that are going to go and the wide receivers, and even though they want an offensive tackle, a lot of those guys are going to go early and bump down other players. But he also did say proceed with caution in that approach because, and he didn't say it specifically, but I think he was alluding to 2019, the depth of the edge class, because he's talked about it before. He said sometimes we've had classes where we thought we could sit on our hands and a guy would fall in our lap, and we've been burned in that way. And I think that's what he meant was 2019. And it is a good point because there's going to be a lot of quarterbacks and receivers, a lot of offensive players that go early. And it's going to push defensive prospects down the board if that's the route the Eagles want to take. But, he is right. I still think a small trade up from like 22 to, 16 to 20, that range, I still think he's absolutely going to be looking into that. I think that's the betting favorite right now for what happens.
Just look at the track record. I mean, you can kind of see the pattern of many NFL general managers. There was a great article that came out today from The Athletic talking about team building in many different regards, asking 14 different GMs and scouts. I 100%, if you love team building, go give that a read. But there got to a point in that article where it was talking about Trent Baalke, who is somebody who loves to trade down. He loves to acquire more picks and more swings of the bat. Well, what is Howie Roseman? This guy he loves to trade. He hates sitting at his spot. He's the kid at the amusement park that's at the back of the roller coaster and is like, Mom, why can't we skip to the front of the line?
And even if he trades down, he's doing it so he has the flexibility to trade up. Like, he's never trading down just to collect picks. He's doing that so he can be aggressive.
He's playing chess always. There's always a move in mind that he can go and quote unquote get his guy. And I think that's ultimately what he was talking about. And you can make reference to multiple different drafts that I think that has come true for the Eagles. I think 2019 and then early on in his tenure, man. I mean, you look at that Marcus Smith draft, right?
2014,
2014, where talk about who made the selections, I don't care. But you talk about the top guys in that class where the Eagles were just outside of that range where it was like, okay, there were 3 picks and 2 guys left on the board being Brandon Cooks and Clinton Dix. New Orleans jumps you to go and get Brandon Cooks, and Clinton Dix was selected right before that. What do the Eagles do in that situation, which they also did in 2019, Lou? They trade back once they realize that those guys, those tiers that are above, let's say, the next guy that you want to pick, if those guys are off the board, like Howie Roseman was saying, well, we sat on our hands for nothing. Now we're kind of in a panic mode. Now we're in a mode where we take Andre Dillard when we didn't want to, and we draft Marcus Smith.
Well, they did trade up for Dillard. 2018 is when they traded down.
They traded back to get Dillard, though, didn't they?
They traded up.
My fault. I'm thinking of the 2 drafts in completely different.
No, you're good.
But yes, 2018 when they trade up or trade down. Trade down. Yeah. My fault. I'm completely all over the place with this one, but especially 2013. It's like you sat there and you got snake bitten. That's what he doesn't want to happen again. You don't want to get snake bitten, especially like you were saying, when it comes to the depth of a certain group. Because if you're sitting there and saying, oh, I can just sit here, and then all of a sudden those defensive guys that you thought were going to get pushed down are all of a sudden off of the board, and maybe you don't rank a couple of those offensive linemen as high as other teams do. And then you're sitting there and you're saying, all right, here we go again. Like, now we're in Marcus Smith mode.
Yeah. And there's no way you're okay with like 4 or 5 guys, right? You normally have 1 or 2 players that you really identify as like, that's the player that you want. So I'm not saying they would trade up like 10 spots to go get an offensive tackle if they like 3 to 4 of them. But I do think there's 1 or 2 that they'll have a lot higher on their board that they'll definitely want to go for. And again, you can't guarantee which guy is going to be available at 22. And like he said, Howie's been, I think one of his strengths has always been has a very good understanding of what's going on around the league. Like, that's why he's always the first one, like, to make a trade. Like, how did not anybody else know that A.J. Brown was available? Because Howie's always working the phone. So I think in that regard, he is, good at finding out what's going to happen, predictability on the board, but you can't always predict. He even said that today. Like, there's multiple times in each round where he goes, oh, wow, like, did not see that coming. So, and that way you can't predict it. So that's another reason you want to trade up, just so you have that optionality.
I can't believe I mixed those 2 classes up. I mean, 2018 was clear. Like, they moved down.
Oh, you're good.
15 spots.
But the point remained, like, exactly what you're saying. I mean, nobody just sits there. I don't think that's. No. I was surprised even last year he just sat there and took Nolan Smith.
And it's funny because in 2019, who did they end up trading down with? That ended up being the Baltimore Ravens. And then who did they turn around and do the same thing where they jumped a team in the Baltimore Ravens to go and get Kyle Hamilton? And who also did they trade down with in 2018? The Baltimore Ravens. It's like they're always connected with these few different teams, and you can kind of see who they're going to call. That's why the Cowboys won a couple years ago when they traded up for Devontae. It was like, what? Why are you making a trade with your in-division opponent to go up and get a guy? Well, it's because Howie Roseman is going to leave every stone overturned, and he's going to hopefully find out the path to get his guy. And like he said today, Lou, he does it. I'm glad somebody asked him, like, how do you feel about your ability to predict how things are going to happen? He's like, I have a pretty good understanding. He's like, but in the second round, that's when the curveballs start to come
Sure.
into play. And that's how he kind of has done best over the last couple of years, the last iterations of himself, has kind of found himself in the calm in these drafts, right? Where you don't get in the Marcus Smith situations anymore. You don't get in the Andre Dillard situation. You don't get in these situations where you're just sitting on your hands for Jalen Reagor. You kind of know what you want, what your value is, and you're not going to waver from that. Like Howie's not going to overdraft a Danny Watkins anymore. That's not going to happen. He's not going to overdraft a Marcus Smith. He's going to get his value at the positions that he deems are deep. And if it's not deep, maybe he has to take a chance and go and get player number one at that position via a trade up, like Jordan Davis, like Jalen Carter. But if that's going to be the difference between a Jalen Reagor and a Jalen Carter, give me the little bit of a trade up to go get that guy.
Yeah, for sure. And again, if it's a thinner class at another position that you're prioritizing just as much, like you're going to prefer that. And I'm not saying if a class is deep, that still means you trade up no matter what. Like if you do identify 5 guys at 22 that you're okay taking and 4 of them are still available and it's pick like 17 or 18, you can justify staying there for sure, trading up for a thinner spot. But
well, then 2013 happens and then you're in the Brandon Cooks.
Yeah, exactly. But also last year though, like they didn't move and Nolan Smith was available. So you got to just, again, predictability, like you have to have a good understanding of what's coming and be ready for all scenarios, because if there is a quick run, you need to make sure you get involved. Yep. And sometimes it's better to be proactive in that way and move up before that run happens. So there's just so many variables to it. I cannot wait to see what they do next week on Thursday. I would predict though, for sure, as we've been talking about a lot on the show, they do trade up from 22, and his comments today and just that sicko tone when he said, I like trades. Like he's absolutely making a deal.
It's like a blabbering guy at the bar. It's like,
yeah,
what do you say? Like, why do you keep saying this?
I started laughing. That was so funny. All right. DeVonta Smith met with the media today before Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni as he signed a new contract extension. A.J. Brown's deal is exactly the same, $25 million a year over the next few seasons, but the cap hit does raise a lot in 2024 or 5 in 2026. What are they going to do with that A.J. Brown contract now that Smith is locked up and that cap hit continues to move up? We'll get into that coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles.
As we roll along, this episode of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at GameTime. Folks, you've probably been one of these people that you set an alarm, you wake up early, you get on whatever ticketing app, and all of a sudden all these robots bought all the tickets. Well, guess what? If you're using GameTime, I can guarantee you that you are going to get the seat that you need with complete peace of mind at the purchase. You're going to see the view from your seat directly on your phone without even having to click into the ticket. All of the pricing shows up with the total cost up front, none of those fees, having to double click, going to find out and entering payment information. No, you're going to get it seamlessly for any deal, any game that you want to go to. I mean, heck, you don't even have to go to a game if you want to go to a comedy show. Lou and I love our comedy. I want to go see Shane Gillis. Well, too bad. He's already sold out here in Denver. Well, guess what? GameTime, they might have some tickets up till and even after the start of the game. Hey, if you want to get in on this WNBA Caitlin Clark action, get on GameTime because those tickets are selling out fast as well. Right now, all of our fans, if you want to get in on the action, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime, simply download the GameTime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL. You get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On NFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
All right, Gino, so DeVonta Smith got that contract extension yesterday, 3 years, $75 million after the 5th-year option kicks in of $15.5 million. So Smith getting a little over $90 million over 4 years, over $65 million of which is guaranteed. Great guaranteed money for Smith. So again, that annual salary, though, of 3 years, $75 million, puts him almost identically at that 25 a year average to what A.J. Brown's at. However, of course, we know that's not how contracts work. Devontae's cap hit very low over the next 3 years. The Eagles classically backloaded that deal. But, Gino, they did the same thing with A.J. Brown a few years ago. Right now, his cap hit is very doable. Him, Smith, and Jalen Hurts, the big three. It's not costing you a lot in 2024. Brown's cap hit is only 12.2 this year, but then it does spike up to $26.5 million next year and then $41.5 million the next year. Again, that's why That's what happens when you backload deals, smaller cap hits. And then down the road, of course, it gets bigger and bigger. The cap's going to go up. But, Gino, I do wonder what their move is going to be. I would guess they're going to extend him again within a year or two to once again backload that, because in just a year or two, he's only going to be 27 years old, like when that $41 million cap hit checks in. So I'd imagine they'd want to kick the can down the road even more. This is not an Alshon Jeffrey situation where it's an injured, slow 31, 32-year-old receiver. So I would guess after the DeVonta Smith extension, a Brown one's probably coming in a year, and probably not 2 years. I'd imagine sooner rather than later.
I believe that this world of these 2 to 3 year deals, I mean, AJ was a little bit longer with that 4-year deal, kind of kept him around with that last year he had with that Tennessee contract as well. Now with DeVonta, you had that 5th-year option. So you are going to have these guys at least for the next couple years. And with AJ Brown, you are intending on extending him. I don't think there's any other reason why you shouldn't. When it comes to how the Eagles operate with contracts, the perfect analogy slipped into my head today. The Eagles use void years more than anybody. It is far and away their bread and butter when it comes to contracts. For the average viewer, you probably have no idea what a void year is. The easiest way to look at this, Lou, a void year is like taking an interest-free credit card and moving the money from, let's say, a credit card that has 25% interest, i.e. the current year cap hit, and pushing it down the road. So now you don't have to pay any interest. You're getting the benefit of having the money in your pocket to go and spend on other players, like Howie Roseman said today. But the bad news is at some point it comes due. Well, what do you do? With a 0% interest credit card, you're hoping that in a couple of years you're making more money, you could pay it off. Well, in a couple of years, the cap hit is going to go up. We do the same thing over and over again. Howie Roseman is operating in a world that he has this lifelong contract. I mean, he is going to keep doing this until there's another global pandemic that makes the cap hit go down. So if it continues to work, I mean, go get yourself some 0% interest credit cards. I can't give you any financial advice. That's not what I do anymore. But I mean, it's working for Howie Roseman at this point, because you have $1 today is better than $1 tomorrow at the end of the day is what it comes down to. And Howie Roseman, he said it in his press conference, Lou, and I love that he said that. The ability to have the freedom to sign multiple guys and bring in other guys because of what he does with the cap. He didn't just get here by accident, folks. I mean, like, there's a reason they operate this way. It clearly works. They're clearly going to continue to do it, and they're going to pay guys at positions that garner being paid. I mean, you're talking about Dallas not paying CeeDee Lamb right now, and
Brandon, or the 49ers not paying Brandon Ayuk.
It's insane that teams aren't paying good players.
Or the Bengals not paying T.
Find
Higgins.
Find a way.
I totally agree. And this also shows the benefit of paying a younger player in their prime versus a guy that's, again, this kind of contradicts what I talked about with Hassan Reddick, and I kind of do get it. I always got it. But, when you look at paying a 30-year-old versus a 25-year-old, you can continue to backload new extensions when a guy still has 5 to 6 years of his prime left, right? And I think that's A.J. Brown. I saw some people talking about on Twitter today, like, would they ever consider trading him? I doubt it, unless there was like another disastrous season and there's locker room problems and problems with target shares, which has not been an issue over the last 2 years, whether people thought it was or not. Unless like they trade up for a wide receiver in round 1 and that guy becomes an absolute star, and then they have some flexibility to trade one of them, I just can't imagine, Gino, a trade scenario. I think they want Brown and Smith here long term. They identified what Dallas couldn't, that having 2 elite receivers for your quarterback long term is one of, outside of having a great offensive defensive line, is the most sustainable way to be good in the NFL. Like, that's what I said when they signed Smith yesterday. Keeping the Hurts, Brown, Smith trio together is the number one way the Eagles continue to be a playoff contender over the next 5 to 10 years.
Lou, you don't have to pull my leg to tell me that building a team by paying very good players at very important positions is the way to go about it. And
but outside of the Buccaneers, the NFL still hasn't. You don't see a lot of. You see teams investing in multiple receivers with high draft picks, but the Buccaneers are the only other team that has 2 receivers over $20 million annually.
Goes back to what we were just talking about, man. Having this freedom, having the optionality to go and sign 9/11ths of your offense to contracts through 2025 or 2026 at this point, and you're locked up in a way that you're not hamstrung. You're not in these New Orleans Saints disaster cap situations or the Russell Wilson. You're talking about minimal cap hits for guys that have maximum return. Take out more 0% interest credit cards, Howie Roseman. Keep kicking the can down the road. Lou, we had this conversation 7 years ago when we're talking about Carson Wentz contract getting extended and Jason Kelsey and all these guys. And you know what? We said the exact same things back then that we're saying right now. The cap keeps going up. You pay good players. You remain competitive. That's how you build a culture. That's why the Eagles are the way they are. And I think Nick Sirianni, Howie Roseman, Jeffrey Lurie, all the guys on offense, I mean, they get it. They understand, like, this next group of leadership is coming in there. And you heard the things about Cam Jurgens and Landon Dickerson being next to Jason Kelsey and Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis learning from Fletcher Cox. They want this thing to be more than a 1 year. Maybe we'll compete in 5 years from now. We'll have some ups and downs. No, they want to compete for multiple years. And what I learned from today's conversation, Lou, is that this thing did not happen by mistake. And people that want to just say that, like, the Eagles luck into things and, like, oh, you can't pay two good wide receivers and win, and you can't build a winning team post quarterback when you see what the Bills are doing, and you see what miss me with all of that. If there's a will, there's a way. And Howie Roseman is showing you that. I mean, it's right in front of your eyes, folks.
That is true. People always say when you pay a quarterback, you can't surround him with, like, star talent.
We're seeing it in front of our eyes.
But they're paying everybody. And again, that's, you have to have an owner that's willing to, front a lot of guaranteed money.
But if you're not, what are you owning a football team for?
Exactly.
Get out of the sport, please.
For the Eagles, it's great that they have a GM that knows he's here long term, and they have an aggressive owner that wants a high flying offense, and they prioritize the right positions because not every team does. So I think that was very enlightening today to watch, the press conference of DeVonta Smith, Howie Roseman, and know that, this team's on the right track. The philosophy is always, that's the good thing about the Eagles, Gino, is even in 2020 and these years when they completely messed up these draft classes and building around their quarterbacks and whatnot, I've never had an issue with the philosophies for the most part. It's always just been execution. We'll see if they can execute next week for the 2024 NFL Draft. Lots of draft content still coming your way this week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. We'll see you tomorrow. As always, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.